Russian literature always had a special place in my heart, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. Its roots can be traced back to the Middle Ages, when epics and chronicles in Old East Slavic were composed, and throughout history, authors such as Alexander Pushkin, Nikolai Gogol, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Lev Tolstoy have blessed us with some amazing masterpieces. But my favorite works of Russian literature come from the Soviet era. In this time period, children's books and fairy tales were published with educational purposes, and due to the scientific revolution, industrialization, and the country's space pioneering, science fiction gained a massive amount of popularity. Although occult fiction, horror, magical realism, and adult-oriented fantasy weren't popular at those times, there are a couple of rare gems of fantasy which were born in that era. Aside from the very obvious Master and Margarita, written by Mikhail Bulgakov, one book that stands out is Monday Begins on Saturday, written by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. And in this video, I will convince you that Soviet-era Russian fantasy is totally worth your time. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, hi, I'm Anna and this is Read and Play, the series where I review fantasy books while playing video games, so if you're into that, please consider subscribing. In this video, I will review one of my favorite books, Monday Begins on Saturday, but before I do so, I would like to throw some random information at you about Russia, because that's what we do on this channel. Russia is the largest country on Earth whose territory is greater than the surface of Pluto. It lies across 2 continents, 11 time zones, and they have the world's longest railway, which is around 10,000 kilometers long, and it takes over a week to get across it. Although Russia is always represented like this in pop culture, there are actually over 180 unique ethnic groups living there with their own cultures, including multiple Mongolic, Turkic, Tungusic, Uralic, and many other groups, which is why Russia has a national holiday that celebrates diversity. Although Russia has a bad reputation for alcoholism, they are actually only the 4th biggest drinkers, since the good people of Belarus, Moldova, and Lithuania seem to enjoy a schnapps or two a bit more. Not to mention that the first person to ever go into space, Yuri Gagarin, was also Russian. The world's coldest city, Yakutsk, is also in Russia.
The boiling water is about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. As you see, it instantly turns into ice crystals.
And for some reason they keep the penis of their most controversial historical figure, Grigory Rasputin, in a museum. If you want to learn more about the life in Russia and their cultures, there are quite a few YouTube channels you can subscribe to, and these are the ones I usually watch. So without further ado, let's dissect this novel. SFF authors Arkady and Boris Strugatsky were the sons of a Jewish art critic and a Russian Orthodox teacher. Their early work was influenced by Ivan Yefremov and Stanislav Lem, but later on they have developed their own unique style, which often incorporated some subtle yet harsh social criticism. They wrote 27 novels, 25 short stories, 3 plays together, as well as a couple of solo works. Damn! Eastern European authors have no chill. Their books had quite a massive influence on the entertainment industry, and not just literature, but also Hollywood and the gaming industry. Video games such as Darkwood, Disco Elysium, and The Final Station, and of course, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl were inspired by their works.
Да пошел ты.
James Cameron was also accused of plagiarizing their fictional universe in his worldwide famous movie Avatar, but Boris rejected the accusation. What a nice guy, honestly. I mean, let's be real, most authors would have jumped on that hate train. But the coolest thing about them is that there's an asteroid called 3054 Strugatsky, which was actually named after them. So why do people love their work so much? Well, I hope I'll be able to demonstrate it to you through analyzing one of their best books, Monday Begins on Saturday. Monday Begins on Saturday, or sometimes translated as Monday Starts on Saturday, is the story of a young software developer called Alexander Ivanovich Privalov, usually called Sasha. Yes, another Sasha, and it's told in 3 segments. The first part introduces us to Sasha and his strange experiences when he picks up 2 hitchhikers that turn out to work for a research institute that needs a new programmer. Now, as a software developer, I can tell you this was the most relatable scene I've seen in fiction so far. The hook-nosed passenger started bending down his fingers as he counted. We need a programmer who is A, not spoiled, B, keen and willing, C, who agreed to live in a hostel, and D, put in the bearded one, for 120 rubles a month. Perhaps you would like one with wings, I asked, or maybe with a halo around his head, cause that's 1 in 1,000. I see these things never change. After a series of magical events, they convince him to join the National Institute for the Technology of Witchcraft and Thaumaturgy, which in the English translation is abbreviated as NITWID. And this institute partially researches human happiness with the use of magic and science. The second part fast forwards to 6 months later when Sasha has to work at New Year's Eve to make sure that nothing out of the ordinary happens in the absence of the researchers. In this segment, we get to peek into what's happening in this institute's wide universe, we get introduced to a handful of eccentric mages and scientists, and we get to meet their director, who has the ability to exist as two separate people at the same time. The book also shows a very realistic side of how difficult it is to work with smart people, because believe me, it is. And we can also see a few complications which come up due to some ego problems. The third part tells the story of Sasha being unable to work after his computer breaks and walking around the institute without anything to do. We get to see his adventures as he enters the Department of Absolute Knowledge, where they invented a machine which can get into an imaginary past or a fictional future. So Sasha agrees to travel in time. He ends up in a future separated by an iron wall, where on one side there's the world of imagination and the other side is dominated by war and fear, enslaved by aliens, robots, parasites, and communists. Let's not read too deep into that. When he returns to the present, he walks around the wild and we get to see some more wild stuff that's happening in the institute, as well as finding out some interesting things about the director. Overall, this book has an engaging and entertaining plot filled with humor, magic, and of course, some scientifically inaccurate nerd stuff, not to mention all the great characters. This is some genius writing which deserves a big thumbs up. In 2007, Seagull Publishing decided to advertise this book as the Russian equivalent of Harry Potter written 40 years earlier, and many reviewers refer to it as such even today, which I find super offensive. Now let's make one thing clear. Harry Potter is the British Monday Begins on Saturday, period. But why do these two books get constantly compared? Well, the answer is simple. It's the over-the-top magical setting and the intricate world building. Straight off the bat, we get to see a talking cat, a talking fish, money that can't be spent, a sofa that can be used as a translator, a talking mirror, magic wands, cylinders, an invisibility cap, and so on. Not to mention that the institute focuses on the study of human happiness with the use of magic and science, and to do so they need some interesting tools such as love potions, living water, flying carpets, and Dracula's tooth. Glad to see my people represented there. There's a demon with dementia, the devil that stole the moon, genies, and vampires. We get to find out the ways magic was used in warfare in the past, and we get introduced to an old magician who's afraid of electricity. Another interesting creature is a double, which can be created with the use of magic in order to replace you for doing easy and regular chores.
Damn, I look old.
It's basically a mindless version of the creator whose only purpose is to pay some bills or to go grocery shopping instead of them. This world contains references to old Slavic mythology, such as Baba Yaga, of course, and Zmej Gorynych, which is basically the Slavic dragon. But the authors also reference Pushkin's work Ruslan and Ludmila. The book isn't short of biblical references either, including the act of turning water into wine and multiplying fish, which basically equates magicians to Jesus. There's also a study of satisfaction, where a scientist manages to create a quote-unquote dissatisfied man with constantly growing needs and hunger. Now, although Sasha is a great programmer, his magic skills aren't the best. He often tries to use magic out of sheer laziness, which he often fucks up, and he also creates some dangerous situations by mumbling some spells in his sleep. The entire world building is wild and mind-blowing, combining elements of science and magic, which is quite common in Central and Eastern European books, such as the Witcher series. I love the way they handled the topic of programming, which nowadays is quite a widespread and common job, but back then it was like magic. And overall, the idea of working to make people happy without drugs, finding the meaning of life, and using math and algorithmics to enhance magic is an amazing idea. So I'm giving this world building a big thumbs up. The prose is highly entertaining due to the humorous wording, the repeated puns, catchphrases, and cultural references. For example, in the original Russian text, the name of the institute is abbreviated as Nichevo, which sounds like the colloquial pronunciation of the word Nichevo, which means it doesn't matter or nothing. In the English translation by Andrew Brownfield, the name of the institute has been translated as NITWID, aka National Institute of the Technology of Witchcraft and Thaumaturgy. The title of the book is often cited throughout the novel, highlighting the workaholic enthusiasm of the researchers, since they almost always work on weekends and their motto is pretty much Monday begins on Saturday. Basically, the entire book can be read as a social commentary stuffed with references to other novels, song lyrics, historical and scientific figures, and mythology. The name of the institute's director or directors, since he exists as two people, Janus, is a reference to the ancient Roman god of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, frames, and endings, who is usually depicted as having two faces. There's also a place referencing the Strugatsky Islands, which gave place to one of Russia's most famous monasteries, as well as a notorious prison camp, which was intended for socialist opponents of Soviet Russia's new Bolshevik regime. One of the characters also seems to be a parody of the controversial Soviet biologist Trofim Lysenko, who condemned perhaps millions of people to starvation through crude and unsubstantiated agricultural research. Another character seems to be modeled after the Soviet astronomer Alexander Alexandrovich Mikhailov, the former director of Pulkovo Observatory, where Arkady Strugatsky used to work, not to mention the classic dream within a dream trope. The funniest thing, however, is the postscript. The book ends with a commentary written by the main character himself, criticizing the authors for the factual errors and scientific and magical inaccuracies their book is filled with. Now, just to give you a gist of their writing, I will read you a little quote from the novel. Strange department this, their motto was, the comprehension of infinity requires infinite time. I did not argue with that, but then they derived an unexpected conclusion from it. Therefore, work or not, it's all the same. In the interest of not increasing the entropy of the universe, they did not work. So what else can I say? It's a well-written book with a prose that's pure joy to read. In 1982, the book was adapted into a movie called Чародеи, which did not please the authors in any way. Чародеи, translated as sorcerers or magicians, is a Soviet romantic fantasy film about a guy who is in love with a witch that works for a magical research institute. The film was initially written by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky as an adaptation of their novel, but the movie director Konstantin Blomberg turned down the original script due to its serious tone and social commentary, and the Strugatskys had to rewrite the script as a light-hearted romantic comedy. As a result, the movie bore almost no resemblance to the book besides the setting and several characters' names. I tried to watch it, but honestly I couldn't. But it's still a more accurate adaptation than Netflix's Witcher.
Are you perhaps short of a marble?
Given how cool this book's entire universe is and how entertaining it is the plot, I still cannot believe that nobody picked it up yet for an actual adaptation. And I really hope that one day we'll get to watch a movie or a TV series about the researchers of Nitwit. Now that we reached the part where I have to rate this book, well, it's a Slavic fantasy book / satire about a programmer filled with Soviet social commentary. What the fuck do you think? It's like this book was written specifically for me. I enjoyed absolutely everything about it and it has become one of my favorite books. So obviously I'm gonna give it a big thumbs up. And I think that it is time for me to get more familiar with the work of the Strugatskys and maybe even try out the video games inspired by their books as well. With that said, I hope I managed to convince you to read the Soviet-era Russian fantasy books. I can honestly recommend you this one, but there's another great social commentary satiric fantasy which has a bit of a different tone, and that is The Master and Margarita, a book I will probably talk about here sooner or later. But enough about my opinions. Have you read this book or are you planning on reading it? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. I usually make videos about the gaming and literature related topics of this area because I feel like there's not enough content about it on YouTube, so if you're into that, please consider subscribing. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
На границе тучи ходят хмуро, край суровой тишиной объят. У высоких берегов Амура часовые Родины стоят.